The peace conference wasn't exactly peaceful. But then, what else could you expect from a gathering of aliens with names that sounded like someone losing a fight with a blender, and humans who thought sarcasm was a universal language? Ambassador Idris Valter sat at the head of the table, surrounded by a menagerie of the galaxy's finest diplomats, or as he liked to call them, the United Nations of pissed-off space elites. Valter adjusted his tie, a strip of blue fabric in a universe where neck fashion was reserved for the socially suicidal, and tried his best not to look like the guy who'd accidentally brought a gun to a knife fight. The station Expanse 4 was their neutral ground, a metallic hunk of technology orbiting a planet nobody cared enough about to give a name. Its air purifiers wheezed like asthmatic cats, and the food was one flavor shy of cardboard, but it was diplomatic tradition. "So, let's talk terraforming," he began, with the kind of gravitas that suggested he had any control over the situation. Directly opposite him, Vrithok, a reptilian ambassador from the Zokkin Dominion, tilted his scaly head. He always looked like he was about to recommend a good moisturizer. "Human Valter, we are most interested in your planet-altering capabilities. However, the recent display of your simulation has caused concern." "Simulation?" Valter blinked, glancing at his aide Jonas, who was busy typing on his console like it owed him money. Jonas whispered, "I think they mean the soccer match from Earth." Valter sighed, a sound that could deflate an ego at 30 paces. "Ah, yes, our traditional sport. A game, you see, not a military exercise." A murmur spread across the table like a bad fart in a small room. The Allura ambassador, a gelatinous blob of existential dread, burbled through its translator. "We were under the impression it was a live demonstration of your combat skills." Valter resisted the urge to laugh. "Just barely. I assure you, the only thing at war in that match was the fans' cholesterol levels." Across the room, the ambassador from the Mechanical Ventrax Collective emitted a series of electronic beeps and clicks. The translation unit droned. "The efficiency of your players was impressive." Such coordination could be perceived as a threat. Valter rubbed his temples, wondering if these aliens knew how hard it was to get humans to agree on anything. "If only we could channel that camaraderie into something useful like not destroying the planet." A human staff member popped in, clutching a portable holo screen, eyes wide with the kind of panic reserved for people who've just remembered they left the stove on. "Ambassador, there's been a development. Please tell me it's a good one." "I could really use a win today," Valter said. The aide hesitated. "Depends on how you feel about riots." "Love them. Can't get enough." "What's up?" "Well, the feed from Earth's broadcast was intercepted by the Varric Federation. They've taken soccer as an act of war." Valter pressed his palms into his eyes. "Great. So we've gone from peace conference to interstellar incident in record time." "Wonderful." He glanced at Vrithok, who was busy recalculating humanity's worth in his head. "I assure you, Ambassador, we have no intention of launching an attack with a football. Though if you've ever been to a match in Manchester, you'd be forgiven for thinking otherwise." The Ventrax ambassador chimed in again, its voice a mechanical grind. "Define football. It's a projectile, let's say, but not the explosive kind. More spherical and prone to causing emotional distress rather than physical harm. Think of it as a cultural exchange tool." Vrithok's eyes narrowed, which Valter took as a sign of contemplation, or possibly indigestion. "This sport of yours, do all humans partake?" Valter chuckled. "Only the ones who've given up on a reasonable life expectancy." The Allura blob burbled. "It seems your species uses sport to resolve conflict." "If by resolve you mean start, then yes," Valter replied. "But I assure you our terraforming efforts are a peaceful venture." A beep from the comm panel interrupted them. Vrithok's aide, a creature that looked like a cross between a gecko and a suitcase, whispered something in its ear. "The Varric fleet approaches," Vrithok announced, voice as smooth as sandpaper. "They demand an explanation or satisfaction." Walter muttered under his breath. I could give them a few players from the league if that'd help. He stood, straightening his jacket, which was wrinkled from its long-term relationship with the back of his chair. Gentlemen, ladies, and gelatinous entities, it seems we have a new agenda item. Preventing an interstellar soccer war. As they filed out of the room, Jonas leaned over. Think they'll buy it? Walter shrugged. Why not? We've sold worse ideas before. Remember the time we convinced them karaoke was an essential cultural practice? Yeah, but then they tried to mass-produce it as a weapon. True, but if anyone's going down for all this, it's going to be FIFA. And thank God for that. They entered the bustling command center of Expanse 4, where humans and aliens alike were scurrying around in a dance of organized chaos. Screens flickered with data and distress calls, a digital symphony of the universe's complaints. Walter took a deep breath. Okay, let's calm the Varak down. Someone get me a line to their leader. And for the love of all that's spaceworthy, find me a translator who can explain soccer without mentioning hooligans. An aide scurried off and Walter turned to Jonas. In the meantime, we need a distraction, preferably one that doesn't involve more sports or, God forbid, karaoke. As they brainstormed, an intern approached, a nervous twitch in his step. Sir, there's a broadcast coming through from the Varak leader. Perfect. Just what I needed today. More screen time, Walter said, leading them to the main console. The Varak leader appeared on the screen, his visage a mass of quivering antennae and shiny exoskeleton like a cockroach who'd just made partner at a law firm. Human Walter, it began, voice a harsh rasp through the comm link. Explain your aggressive maneuvers. Walter forced a smile. Greetings. First, let's clarify. What you saw was a sporting event. An entertainment, not a military action. The Varak leader clicked its mandibles. Entertainment. Your species must have a peculiar sense of leisure. You have no idea, Walter replied. Let me assure you it's as close to combat as we get without blowing things up. Well, besides elections. The Varak leader leaned closer, digitally speaking. So you challenge other species to this football? Walter bit his lip, considering. We could. It'd certainly solve more problems than it'd cause, and think of the merchandising opportunities. Perhaps a demonstration, the Varak leader suggested, antennae twitching in what Walter hoped was amusement. A demonstration, Walter echoed, nodding. We could arrange that. Let's make it a friendly match. No stakes except pride and maybe a few bruised egos, the Varak leader hummed, a sound like an industrial blender chewing on rocks. Agreed. But know this, our athletes are fierce competitors, Walter grinned. Perfect. We'll just bring our best actors. I'm sure we'll all get along famously. As the screen went dark, Jonas whispered, are we really going to play soccer with aliens? Why not? Walter shrugged. It's not like it can end in disaster. Worst case, we lose and they realize we're not a threat. And best case, we win, make some interstellar headlines and maybe even get a sponsorship deal. Besides, how hard can it be to beat a race that's never seen a ball before? Jonas pondered that. You think they'll bring their own referees? I hope so, Walter said, clapping him on the back. Yours are terrible. Now, let's go negotiate peace through the universal language of kicking a ball around. And pray they don't realize how little we actually know about the rules. The Expanse 4 space station creaked ominously, as if the universe itself was sharing in their collective headache. Ambassador Idris Walter paced the command center like a caged animal, the air purifiers wheezing in sympathy. He had once dreamed of a career in diplomacy as a way to see the stars, not realizing he'd be trying to avert interstellar war over a game that mostly involved feet and a ball. The alien delegates were starting to gather, each with their own brand of annoyance. Walter mentally prepared himself. It was like being in a zoo, but instead of feeding the animals, he got to feed them excuses. The first to approach was Calther, a Venar whose strict adherence to protocol made Vulcans look like party animals. Ambassador Walter, Calther's translator, droned, sounding like an overworked librarian. Your species' recent demonstration of war games is deeply concerning to the Venar Council. A misunderstanding, Walter replied. waving his hand like he could swat away their distrust. We call it soccer. A sport, not a battle or a dance of death. Although on bad days it's hard to tell the difference. Calther's expression was unreadable, a poker face perfected by a species that communicated through subtle shifts in eye color. Your species' propensity for violence is noted in our archives, the Venar continued. You should see us when we play Monopoly, Walter shot back without thinking. That's when the real bloodbath begins. Before Calther could respond with anything resembling levity, the lights flickered. An alert blared through the station, an annoying beep that could only mean one thing. Yet another system was on the fritz. Expanse 4 was falling apart at the seams faster than a bargain bin sweater. Perfect, Walter muttered, striding over to Jonas, who was furiously typing commands into his console. What now? Power fluctuations, Jonas reported, not looking up. Seems the station's about as stable as a reality TV star. Fantastic. Anything else going wrong, or should I just assume we're on course for a full meltdown? There's a minor breach in the east wing. Airlock failed again. Of course, Walter sighed. Because why just have a diplomatic crisis when you can add slow death by asphyxiation to the itinerary? Viarithok sidled up, his reptilian eyes darting from Walter to the malfunctioning screens. Human technology appears unreliable. You're not wrong, Walter replied. But look on the bright side. It's never boring. The Allura ambassador, resembling a mound of jellified worries, slithered nearer. Is this instability common, human Walter? Only when we're hosting delegates, Walter said with a grim smile. Consider it part of the experience. A harsh clattering echoed from the ceiling as a panel fell, narrowly missing Jonas. He didn't even flinch, more concerned with his console than his own safety. Walter admired that kind of dedication, or masochism. Someone get maintenance on that, Walter called, though he doubted anyone would respond. The maintenance crew was about as effective as a chocolate teapot. Should we retreat to our ships? Calther asked, his voice tinged with something approaching concern. Or was it disdain? Hard to tell with aliens. I'd advise against it, Walter said, deciding honesty was the best policy. Space outside isn't much friendlier, and at least here you can enjoy the light show. If you can call it that, Jonas murmured as the lights flickered again. More like a strobe effect for a very tense dance party. And what of the Varak fleet? Viarithok pressed. Their impending arrival complicates matters. Walter glanced at the screens, which now showed a dozen blips approaching like angry bees. We're arranging a friendly match to demonstrate our soccer as just that, friendly and decidedly non-lethal. Calther's gaze was skeptical, but he nodded. Very well, we will observe. Great, Walter replied, his forced cheerfulness cracking slightly. Let's hope they like our style. Or at the very least our jerseys. The command center was a flurry of activity, each diplomat with an entourage of aides trying to make sense of the chaos. The tension was palpable, like a rubber band stretched to the point of snapping. Jonas, Walter called, make sure the Varak leader gets the message about our invitation. Already sent, along with a list of rules, Jonas replied. Let's hope they don't try to interpret offsides as a military maneuver, or penalties as acts of sabotage, Walter added, the thought sending a shiver down his spine. Last thing we need is them thinking we're pulling a fast one with red cards. A technician approached, his uniform as disheveled as his hair. Sir, we're losing life support in sectors 3 and 4. Oh, is that all? Walter replied, his smile grim. And here I was worried it'd be something serious. It's serious, sir. Yeah, I know, Walter sighed. All right, keep it together and fix what you can. If anyone complains, tell them we're just testing their endurance. Builds character. The technician nodded, scurrying back to the chaos with all the enthusiasm of someone heading to a dentist appointment. Calther's eyes flickered from Walter to the malfunctioning equipment. Your station is most entertaining, Ambassador Walter. Glad you're enjoying the show, Walter replied. It's like a circus, but with fewer clowns and more existential dread. The Allura ambassador bubbled in agreement, though its version of agreement sounded distressingly like drowning. We are curious about the outcome of your sporting event. Curious. That's a diplomatic way to put it, Walter said. Let's just hope it ends with handshakes, not interstellar lawsuits. Jonas tapped away at his console, occasionally pausing to glance at the multitude of screens displaying various crises. Sir, the Varak leader has accepted the invitation. They'll dock in T-10 minutes. Wonderful. Let's hope their sense of humor is better than their sense of strategy, Walter said, trying to muster a grin. 10 minutes on Expanse 4 felt like a lifetime, the station's constant groaning and creaking making it sound like it was lamenting its own existence. As the Varak ship docked, Walter took a moment to gather himself. It wasn't every day you had to explain to an alien race that a sport renowned for hooliganism was actually a peaceful pastime. The Varak delegation entered, led by their leader, a figure resembling a beetle crossed with a particularly disgruntled librarian. Walter met them with a smile that was 50% diplomacy and 50% resignation. "Welcome to Expanse 4, he said, gesturing to the room which was currently in the process of not falling apart. "Please ignore the ongoing maintenance." "We call it character building." The Varak leader, antennae twitching, regarded Walter with what could have been amusement. "Human Walter, we anticipate this demonstration." "As do we," Walter replied. "Let's settle any misunderstandings on the pitch. Or in this case, the station's recreational bay, assuming it doesn't collapse before kickoff." The Varak leader's mandibles clicked in a way that seemed to indicate agreement. "We shall compete with honor. And hopefully without anyone losing an eye," Walter added, clapping his hands together. "Let's get this party started. Jonas, you ready?" Jonas nodded, though he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, possibly even in the vacuum of space. "Ready as I'll ever be, sir." As the group made their way to the recreational bay, the station continued its symphony of malfunctions, each new alarm a reminder of the razor-thin line they walked between diplomacy and disaster. Walter couldn't help but think that if they survived this, he'd definitely deserve a medal, or at least a very strong drink. "Here goes nothing," Walter muttered to himself as they entered the bay, the makeshift soccer pitch a patchwork of different materials hastily assembled by the station's beleaguered maintenance crew. The Varak players took their positions, a mass of exoskeletons and twitching antennae. The human team, hastily assembled from station staff who'd played soccer at least once or could convincingly pretend, looked back with a mix of confidence and mild terror. "Remember," Walter said to the human team, "just pretend like you know what you're doing. It's worked for me so far." The whistle blew, or rather, Jonas blew into a comm device that emitted a sound vaguely similar to a whistle. The game was on, and the galaxy held its breath. Not that anyone would notice over the sound of the station's continued mechanical complaints. As the players moved, Walter stood on the sidelines, arms crossed, trying to look authoritative rather than just deeply concerned. The Varak players were surprisingly agile, their movements more akin to an intricate dance than a game, and for a brief moment Walter felt a pang of actual fear. "They're good," Jonas muttered, eyes glued to the match. "Yeah, well, let's hope they are better at sportsmanship," Walter replied. "Last thing we need is them winning and demanding a trophy made of our bones." The game was a blur of limbs and mandibles, the ball moving in ways that defied logic and possibly a few laws of physics. The alien spectators watched with interest, their expressions ranging from bemusement to genuine enjoyment. Then, without warning, the lights flickered again, plunging the room into temporary gloom. There was a moment of chaos, the sound of colliding bodies echoing through the bay before the emergency lights kicked in, casting everything in a harsh red glow. "Great," Walter muttered. "Now it looks like we're staging a horror movie." The Varak leader approached, eyes shining in the dim light. "Is this part of the experience?" "Only if you enjoy surprise light shows," Walter replied, hoping his sarcasm wasn't lost in translation. "Consider it a free bonus." With the lights restored, the game resumed, the the players back to their dance of chaos and diplomacy. The human team managed to score a point, the ball slipping past the Varak goalkeeper with a grace that surprised everyone, not least the humans. "Well, I'll be damned," Walter said, actually feeling a twinge of pride. "We might just pull this off." Calthor sidled up beside him, the Venar's eyes reflecting the artificial light. "Your species' determination is commendable." "Thanks," Walter replied. "We may not be the best, but we're certainly persistent." The game ended with a narrow human victory, the Varak players accepting the outcome with a surprising amount of grace. The Varak leader approached Walter, antennae twitching in what could only be described as a gesture of respect. "Your game is intriguing, human Walter. We have learned much from this exchange." "Glad to hear it," Walter said, relief flooding through him. "Let's hope this is the start of a beautiful friendship. Or at least a less hostile one." As the delegates began to disperse, Walter turned to Jonas, a tired smile on his face. "Well, we did it. We turned a potential war into a game of soccer." Jonas shrugged, exhaustion etched into his features. "If only all conflicts could be solved this way." "Yeah," Walter agreed. "Though I can't wait for the day we hold karaoke as the next diplomatic exercise." With the crisis averted for now, Walter allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Sure, it was a patchwork solution held together with duct tape and hope, but it worked. At least until the station fell apart or the next alien misunderstanding. For now, though, they'd earned themselves a brief respite, a chance to rest before the universe inevitably found new ways to test their diplomatic skills. "Come on," Jonas, Walter said, clapping him on the back. "Let's find somewhere that isn't actively trying to collapse on us. I think we've earned it." And with that, they left the recreational bay, leaving behind the chaos and the aliens and heading into the uncertain future, hoping for the best but, as always, preparing for the worst. Ambassador Idris Walter was a man on the verge, teetering on the precipice of a mental breakdown that only a handful of diplomats could appreciate. Sure, he'd survived the soccer match without triggering an interstellar incident, but celebrating too soon was a rookie mistake. Besides, he had a sneaking suspicion that the universe was planning something special just for him. The Expanse 4 space station groaned ominously again, which was about as reassuring as a rattlesnake lullaby. Idris half expected the walls to start shedding wires like a snake sheds skin. The station was as reliable as a politician's promise, good intention but prone to catastrophic failure at the least opportune moments. In the command center, Calthor's translator buzzed along in that condescending tone, like a robotic librarian keeping score. "Ambassador Walter," it began, "I trust you're handling the situation adeptly." "Handling it? More like juggling chainsaws with my eyes closed," Idris muttered. The station's air purifiers wheezed in agreement, probably plotting their own retirement. Jonas was at his console, a frenetic blur of fingers and anxiety. "Sir, the life support systems are still not stabilizing. I've got rerouted power, bypass circuits, and even offered the systems a bribe, but nothing's working." Idris sighed. "Great. So we're still on course for the world's worst surprise party." Jonas glanced up, his attempt at a smile overshadowed by deep concern. "I'd say spectacular, but that might jinx it." Suddenly, the doors slapped open, and Lynn Torv stormed in like a hurricane seeking somewhere new to ruin. She was the station's lead engineer, a woman who could probably fix a starship with a paperclip and a swear word. Her expression spoke volumes, none of it in favor of optimism. "Well, isn't this a cozy little campfire?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Lynn," Idris greeted. "Come to join our merry band of misfits. If by merry you mean a group of people about to suffocate in space, then yes, I'm all in," she replied, looking over the malfunctioning consoles. "I've just been down to the lower levels. The life support is failing because someone forgot to consider the impact of terraforming." Terraforming. Idris blinked. This place was supposed to be neutral ground, not a gardening project. That's what happens when you hire contractors who think terraforming is a new cocktail. Lynn explained, tapping furiously on Jonas's console. "The systems are designed for a planet, not this rusting tin can." It's struggling to keep up. Walter pinched the bridge of his nose, wishing he could pinch reality instead. "So, we're in a station that's confused about being a station." "Wonderful. Any good news?" Lynn offered a smile that could have been considered optimistic in better circumstances. "I've got a couple of ideas. None of them good, but hey, options are options." Jonas raised an eyebrow. "Do any of them involve duct tape and hope?" "Because that's all we have left. More like gum and divine intervention," Lynn corrected. "But first, I need you to reroute power from non-essential systems, like the coffee machines." Idris winced. "Aren't those the last lifeline we've got? We can survive a caffeine drought," Lynn said with a shrug. "Oxygen slightly more critical." "Fine," Idris relented. "Jonas, make it happen. And tell the crew to start brewing tea." "No one dies on my watch from lack of caffeine." Jonas nodded, already tapping away. "Emergency tea rations it is then." Calthor watched the exchange, eyes shifting colors in what might have been their version of bemusement. "Human adaptability is unique. That's a nice way of saying desperate, isn't it?" Idris replied with a wry grin. "Precisely," Calthor's translator confirmed, its voice a tinge too smug for Idris's liking. With the lights flickering yet again, and the station's insistent complaints echoing through every corridor, Idris felt the weight of responsibility pressing down. Each malfunction, each crisis, was a reminder of how close they were to catastrophe. If they could just keep the station from imploding long enough to finish this peace conference, it'd be a miracle worthy of a holiday. "Lynn, what's Plan B?" Idris asked, knowing full well that Plan A was already a non-starter. "Plan B is borrowing from Plan C and hoping nobody notices," Lynn said, pulling up schematics on the nearest screen. "We need to recalibrate the life support to match what we've got." "It'll be rough, but it should hold." "Should?" Jonas echoed, skepticism heavy in his voice. "Well, it beats the alternative, which is everyone taking a long walk outside without a suit," Lynn said, fixing Jonas with a stare that brooked no argument. Idris nodded. "Get it done, Lynn." "We've come too far to let a bit of bad engineering blow it all." As Lynn dove into the labyrinthine mess of the station's systems, Idris turned his attention back to the peace conference. Diplomatic tensions were like a pot on the boil, and the last thing they needed was for it to spill over. The Varak leader, now more familiar with human customs post-soccer match, might actually understand that this chaos was not an elaborate ruse. "Think the Varak will appreciate our improvisational skills?" Idris asked Jonas. "If they don't, they're not as intelligent as they claim to be," Jonas said, leaning back in his chair. "Still, we might want to avoid mentioning the terraforming screw-up." "It's not exactly confidence-inspiring." "Agreed," Idris said. "Last thing we need is an interstellar Yelp review mentioning suicidal architecture." The station creaked again, a noise that was quickly becoming the soundtrack of their lives. Idris considered taking up a new line of work after this debacle, maybe something quieter, like snake charming or bomb disposal. As the minutes ticked by with all the grace of a lead balloon, Lynn finally emerged from the console maze. "All right, I've tightened the proverbial screws. Power's stable enough to keep us breathing, but don't ask it to do jumping jacks." "Thanks, Lynn," Idris said, relief washing over him like a cold shower. "You've earned a medal. Or at least a stiff drink." "I'll take the drink, thanks," Lynn replied, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. With the immediate crisis dodged, Idris allowed himself a moment to breathe. It wasn't exactly a victory, but in the grand scheme of things, it was enough to keep them moving forward. The peace conference was still on track, the delegates mollified for now, and no one had died from lack of tea. "All right, team," Idris said, clapping his hands together. "Let's keep this ship station, whatever, afloat until the talks are done. Then we can collapse." Jonas chuckled. "Here's hoping we collapse on a couch and not on the floor." "I'll take what I can get," Idris said. "Come on, let's check in with our guests. Make sure they're still more curious than murderous." The journey to the delegates' quarters was an exercise in maintaining optimism in the face of absurdity. The station continued its cacophony of ominous noises, clanks, groans, and the occasional hissing, sound that Idris chose to ignore for the sake of his sanity. He found Vrithok, the reptilian ambassador from the Zokkin Dominion, in deep conversation with the Varak leader. Their discussion halted abruptly as Idris approached, their alien gazes assessing him as if weighing a potential meal. Despite their appearances, both had proven themselves reasonable, at least by alien standards. Ambassador Vrithok, Varak leader, Idris greeted them with a nod. "I trust you're finding your accommodations." Adequate. Vrithok's scales shimmered under the harsh station lights, a sight that would have been almost mesmerizing if Idris wasn't preoccupied with keeping them all alive. "Human Idris, your species' resilience is legendary. We have survived worse conditions." "Glad to hear it," Idris replied, working to keep his tone light. "We're having a bit of fun with the station, but nothing to worry about. Think of it as a free roller coaster." The Varak leader's antennae wiggled, which Idris had learned to interpret as a sign of amusement, kind of like an alien chuckle. "We appreciate your hospitality, human Valter." The soccer game was enlightening or terrifying? Idris asked, his grin lopsided. "A bit of both, perhaps," the Varak leader allowed. "Your species' ability to adapt is commendable." "Well, we try our best," Idris said. "Hopefully we can wrap up this peace conference without any more surprises." "Indeed," Vrithok agreed. "Your diplomatic skills have been tested, human Idris, and you have risen to the challenge." Idris nodded, though he didn't feel particularly heroic. "Thanks. We'll do our best to keep things running smoothly. If you need anything, just let us know." As he left the room, Idris allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. Task 1, keep the aliens happy. Task 2, ensure nobody died. So far, so good. Back in the command center, Jonas and Lynn were deep in conversation, debating the merits of rerouting power from the station's garden. Idris wondered if they could convince the plants to photosynthesize a bit harder, but figured that might be a step too far into the absurd. "Anything new?" he asked, hoping for a miracle but prepared for more chaos. "Just the usual," Jonas replied. "The station's still playing hard to get." "Great," Idris said. "I didn't sign up for a space opera." "But you're in one now," Lynn reminded him, her tone light despite the chaos. "Think of it as career advancement, or career ending," Idris countered. "In this line of work, they're the same thing," Lynn said with a shrug. With their immediate crises temporarily managed, Idris found himself reflecting on the absurdity of it all. Here they were, on the edge of nowhere, holding a peace conference that was one malfunction away from disaster. Yet they'd survived, adapted, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. "Well, it's been a hell of a day, folks," Idris said, leaning against the console. "Here's hoping we can get through tomorrow without any new disasters, or at least with fewer disasters," Jonas said, typing something into the console with one hand while sipping tea with the other. As the lights flickered again, Idris couldn't help but laugh, a sound that was half amusement, half hysteria. In a world where everything seemed designed to fall apart, laughter was the only armor he had. "All right," he said, gathering the remains of his composure. "Let's keep it together. We've got a peace conference to run, and I'd prefer it if we didn't end up the punchline of some cosmic joke." "Too late," Lynn quipped. The station groaned again, a deep metallic wail that seemed to echo the collective despair of anyone trying to keep hope alive. Idris Valter was rapidly losing count of how many times he'd heard it today. It was the soundtrack to their impending doom, like being serenaded by a dying whale with a penchant for melodrama. Lynn Torv was knee-deep in wires, having transformed the control room into her personal workshop/chaotic nest. Bits of tech lay scattered like the remnants of a particularly reckless scavenger hunt. "We're one fuse short of a full blackout," she muttered, not for the first time, as she poked at something that looked like it might bite back. "Great," Jonas replied, deadpan from his own corner of chaos. Maybe then we won't have to see this place fall apart. Idris pinched the bridge of his nose, a futile attempt at holding off an imminent headache. Any chance we can avoid having our conference guests BBQ'd by our malfunctioning systems today? That's Plan D, Lynn said, not looking up. Right after please don't explode and pray to every deity we've got. Considering the Venar thinks soccer is a military exercise, they might appreciate a good explosion, Jonas added with a wry smile. Calther, the enigmatic entity with the patronizing translator, hovered nearby, watching with what Idris could only describe as detached curiosity. Its translator chimed in. Human resilience in the face of self-engineered disasters is endlessly fascinating. Glad to amuse you, Idris said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Let's just hope the fascination lasts longer than our air supply. The station shuddered, again, interrupting the brief levity with a reminder that the worst was yet to come. Idris could almost hear the peace conference participants plotting their escape plans, likely involving trebuchets and a prayer. Another ominous creak. Perfect. This time Idris could sense the presence of impending doom as tangibly as the recycled air they all breathed. Lynn, I need you to pull a miracle out of your toolbox. Magic hat. Take your pick, Lynn interrupted, pushing back from her latest victim, a console now blinking furiously. I'm working on it, but I swear this station was designed by a sadist with a grudge against engineers. Or a committee, Jonas quipped, tapping at his console with the dedication of a pianist playing a funeral march. Idris shook his head. Okay, let's focus. We need something to show the aliens that we've got this under control, like a PowerPoint presentation. Lynn suggested, voice thick with sarcasm. Exactly. Nothing says professional like colorful graphs of how we're about to implode, Jonas added. All right, team, Idris said, straightening as if sheer posture could command more authority than the chaos around him. Let's keep them in the dark, figuratively, not literally. He left the engineers to their curse-laden symphony and made his way to the conference room, the station's usual groans providing a fitting overture. The closer he got, the thicker the tension became, like walking into a room filled with invisible smoke. Viarithok and the Varak leader were huddled together, their alien forms tense. They turned as Idris approached, their expressions inscrutable, though he wagered it was something between suspicion and incredulity. Ambassador Valter, Viarithok began, voice smooth as a well-oiled guillotine, these occurrences are becoming frequent. You could say that, Idris replied, aiming for nonchalance but landing somewhere in the vicinity of barely concealed panic. We're just adding a bit of excitement to the conference. The Varak leader's antennae twitched, an unsettling motion like a broken radar. We have concerns these war games are less training and more imminent threat. War games. Oh, you mean the soccer match? Idris forced a laugh that came out strangled. A cultural misunderstanding, I assure you. No actual war involved. Just a lot of running and shouting. Their silence was less than comforting, the kind that comes before an accusation or an execution order. Idris held his ground, hoping to project confidence rather than flop sweat. Rest assured, we're doing everything to stabilize the situation, Idris continued, gesturing around at the barely controlled chaos. And I promise, no more surprises. Even as the words left his mouth, the station shivered like an overcaffeinated chihuahua, lights flickering in a synchrony that screamed famous last words. Idris resisted the urge to apologize to the universe for tempting fate. Ambassador Idris, Viarithok tilted his head, an unsettlingly reptilian gesture that suggested more than mere curiosity. Your assurances are interesting. We shall observe away, Idris replied, his smile strained but intact. We're all about transparency. As he left the room, Idris felt the weight of their gaze on him, sharp as a knife to the back. He tried not to dwell on the fact that any second now, his metaphorical juggling act might involve real knives. Back in the control room, Lynn was swearing at a particularly stubborn junction box, while Jonas appeared to have given up on bodily coherence and was sprawled across his station in a dramatic slump. "How's it looking?" Idris asked, not really wanting the answer but knowing it was part of the job. "Like a symphony of destruction," Lynn grumbled, yanking out a wire with more force than necessary. "But if I can convince these wires to cooperate, we might just avoid a full shutdown, and the likelihood of that," Idris pressed, "depends. How persuasive do you find threats of physical violence?" She shot back, eyes narrowed at the offending tech. Idris chuckled, a sound that was more resignation than amusement. "Just do what you can. We need to keep breathing, and I'd prefer not to do it through a straw attached to a spacesuit." "On it, boss," Lynn said, with a mock salute. "But if this station was a horse, we'd be considering calling the vet with a rifle. The metaphorical glue factory is not an option," Jonas chimed in, having managed to regain his usual semblance of composure. "Not yet anyway." The station groaned again, a sound like a dying moose attempting opera. Idris steeled himself. "All right, we can talk tech all day, but let's not forget we've got aliens to impress." "Yep," Lynn said, voice layered with a cocktail of frustration and resolve. "Nothing like a little alien diplomacy to spice up a slow systems collapse." Jonas leaned back, arms crossed. "Think the aliens are buying our everything is fine routine?" "They are skeptical," Idris admitted, "but as long as we keep the peace and the lights on, we might just pull through." "Might," Jonas repeated, a single eyebrow raising. "Such confidence. As much as a man steering a sinking ship can muster," Idris replied, grinning despite the odds stacked like a precarious Jenga tower ready to topple. "Now if only we had this ship steering," Lynn muttered, her sarcasm cutting through the tension like a laser through butter. The station gave another shudder, and Idris felt it in his bones, a tremor that spoke of age, neglect, and the inevitable march toward chaos. It was a grim reminder of the stakes and the fragility of their peace. But there was something else too, a sense that, against all logic, they might just make it. "All right, people," Idris said, clapping his hands together. "Let's keep this tin can together. We've got a peace conference to run, and I'd prefer not to be remembered as the ambassador who literally went down with the ship." Lynn nodded, pushing herself to her feet with a sigh that echoed the station's own complaints. "I'll do what I can. That's all I ask," Idris replied with a nod of encouragement. With the mood marginally less dire, Idris turned his attention back to the station's assorted grievances. The lights flickered but held, and for the moment that was enough. He allowed himself a brief moment of hope, the kind that came wrapped in dark humor and desperation. "Jonas, keep an eye on the systems. Lynn, continue being our miracle worker. And I'll keep the aliens from deciding they'd prefer to negotiate with someone less human." "Good luck," Jonas said, his voice carrying the weight of their shared burden. Idris nodded. "I'll take all the luck I can get." As he left the control room, the station's familiar groans followed him like an old friend with a penchant for complaints. But there was a part of him that welcomed it, because as long as the station was groaning, they had something to fight for, and maybe, just maybe, something to hope for. In the face of cosmic indifference, Idris Valter knew one thing: they'd keep fighting. Because while the universe was vast, cold, and often unforgiving, humanity had a way of muddling through. Even if it meant duct tape, gum, and a whole lot of prayers were their only tools. The flickering lights above seemed to agree, and for now, that was enough. Idris Valter was slowly getting accustomed to disaster. Not that he enjoyed it. An ambassador's job was to prevent chaos, not become intimate with it. But Expanse 4 seemed determined to buck tradition. The station dimmed, and then suddenly, without so much as a polite warning beep, plunged into darkness. "Someone forgot to pay the power bill," Jonas muttered, his voice the only thing cutting through the void. "Well, this is just peachy," Idris said, stumbling over something that felt suspiciously like a chair leg. "Who's got the flashlight app? Got a better suggestion?" Lynn's voice piped up, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone smacking a console. Sparks flared briefly, casting an eerie glow on her face. "How about we fix it?" Idris could almost see Jonas raising an eyebrow in the dimness. "Fix it." "What are you, an optimist?" "More like a masochist," Lynn replied, the console's sparks giving just enough light to highlight her expression of grim determination. "But hey, welcome to my world." Their banter was cut short by a growing murmur from beyond the control room, the sound of panic rippling through the peace conference like an electric shock. Idris felt the weight of responsibility settle back on his shoulders, heavier than ever. "All right, nobody panic," he said, in the manner of someone who was very much panicking. "Lynn, how long until we can see again, if the station cooperates?" "And that's a big if. Maybe 10 minutes," Lynn replied, her voice strained as she wrestled with stubborn wires. 10 minutes, Jonas echoed with the enthusiasm of a man informed he has 10 minutes to outrun a bear. And in that time, Idris said with forced cheer, "we convince a room full of aliens not to riot." The station's dark, unsettling creaks added their own commentary. Idris could only imagine what the delegates were thinking, likely somewhere between "we're all going to die" and "how quickly can we steal a shuttle." Idris stumbled toward the conference room, his path guided by the station's mournful groans. The flickering lights from Lynn's console lent him just enough light to avoid tripping over too many obstacles. By the time he reached the room, he was breathless and had acquired a few new bruises. Viarithok and the Varak leader were visible only as silhouettes, their alien outlines casting long shadows. Idris couldn't see their expressions, but he didn't need to. He could feel the suspicion radiating from them like heat from a reactor. "Ambassador Walter," Viarithok's voice floated across the room, smooth and full of threat. "Is this part of the human training exercises?" No, Idris said quickly, "definitely not a training exercise. More of a surprise drill. Keeps everyone on their toes." The Varak leader's antennae twitched again, a motion Idris was quickly coming to despise. "We sense deception." Idris was about to launch into a metaphorical tap dance of diplomatic nonsense when Calther's translator interrupted, voice dripping with condescension. "Your human struggles are truly enlightening. Such resilience." "Resilience, sure," Idris said with false amiability. "Call it what you want." The translator continued, unfazed. "We find your predicament amusing. Glad we can entertain," Idris replied, wishing he could strangle a machine. "We aim to please." Lynn's voice crackled over the station's intercom, an unintended scare in the darkness. "Idris, I've found a way to get auxiliary power up, but it's going to take time. And by time, I mean the kind old gods laugh at. Just do your best," Idris said, his voice firm but warm. A hard balance to strike when your heart's trying to break the sound barrier with its thumping. "We'll keep things from getting too exciting up here." "Define exciting," Lynn muttered before the intercom cut out. The Varak leader and Viarithok were whispering now, an unsettling lull as the station echoed their quiet conspiracy. Idris felt the need to fill the silence, if only to keep paranoia from setting up shop in his brain. "Look, we're working on it," he said, wishing he sounded more convincing. "It's a minor hiccup. Happens all the time in the best stations." "The best stations do not plunge into darkness," Viarithok replied, his voice a coiled snake ready to strike. "Depends on your definition of best," Idris shot back. "We like to keep our guests on their toes. We sense a lack of control," the Varak leader intoned, voice like a distant storm. Idris could practically feel his diplomacy manual slipping through his fingers, headed straight for the theoretical shredder. "Control's overrated. Innovation thrives on chaos." "Right." Behind him, the station let out another of its signature groans, a sound Idris was starting to interpret as an ominous agreement. Back in the control room, Lynn was waging war with the station's outdated systems. Each curse she uttered seemed to carry with it a flicker of light, as if the station were trying to appease her. Jonas watched her with a mix of admiration and bewilderment. "Ever thought about a career in demolition?" Jonas asked, his attempt to lighten the mood falling flat. "Every day," Lynn grunted, pulling a panel open to reveal a mess of tangled wires. This place is a death trap thinner than a politician's promise. No argument there, Jonas replied, his fingers flying over his console, trying to coax life from stubborn technology. Think we'll live to see daylight? If I have anything to say about it, Lynn said, her voice like iron and caffeine. These systems are like my ex, temperamental and prone to shutting down, but I've got a few tricks left. Glad one of us does, Jonas said, though his wry smile suggested he was only half joking. The station's lights flickered again, but held, barely. It was enough to lower the panic level from headless chicken to headless chicken with a map. A small victory, but they'd take it. All right, let's do this, Lynn muttered, her hands a blur as she worked. We're not out of the woods, but I'll be damned if we let this station beat us. In the conference room, Idris was trying to maintain a semblance of order. The delegates were still tense, their whispered conversations a dull roar threatening to boil over. Idris glanced at Vrithok and the Varak leader, hoping to find something, anything, that resembled understanding. What's important, Idris said, improvising as he went, is that we're all still here cooperating. It's a testament to our shared resolve. That remains to be seen, Vrithok replied, his skepticism a palpable force. We're committed to peace, Idris insisted, trying to convince himself as much as them. No matter how grim it looks now, the darkness does not inspire confidence, the Varak leader said, his voice a ghostly whisper in the dim room. Then let's be the light, Idris replied, wishing he had a torch for dramatic effect. We're stronger together, right? Silence met his words, but it wasn't the hostile kind. It was contemplative. Idris took it as a win, hoping Lynn's miracle was on its way. Back in the control room, Lynn was in her element, or what passed for it in a dilapidated station. Her fingers worked magic, albeit the kind of magic that involved a lot of cursing and the occasional threat of violence. Almost there, Lynn muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. Just a little more. The lights flickered again, stronger this time, like a boxer staggering to his feet. It wasn't much, but it was something, a reminder that they weren't done yet. Jonas leaned back, watching as the control room began to glow with the faint light of progress. You did it, he said, a hint of awe in his voice. Not yet, Lynn replied, her voice cautious. But we've got a fighting chance. Good enough for me, Jonas said, his customary humor returning. Now let's hope Idris can keep the peace while we save his diplomatic tie. Back in the conference room, Idris was running out of platitudes, but at least the lights were starting to flicker back to life. It wasn't much, but it was a promise of stability, a fragile thing but enough to cling to. See, Idris said, gesturing to the returning glow. A little light to guide us. Vrithok regarded him with a look that could have been respect or maybe just mild curiosity. You humans are. Puzzling, Idris chuckled, a dry sound that matched the station's ambience. We try. Sometimes even we're surprised it works. The Varak leader's antennae twitched, this time less sinister, more intrigued. Perhaps. There is hope. Hope's the one thing we've got in spades, Idris replied, the hint of a genuine smile on his lips. As the station's systems groaned back to a semblance of life, Idris felt the weight on his shoulders lighten just a fraction. They weren't out of the woods yet, far from it, but they had a shot. And in the end, that was all they needed. All right, Idris said, turning back to the room, let's get back to the business of not killing each other, shall we? There were murmurs of agreement, cautious but real. It wasn't much, but Idris would take it, clinging to optimism like a lifeline. In the control room, Lynn and Jonas shared a triumphant moment, two warriors against an indifferent universe, united by their refusal to give up. We did it, Lynn said, her voice a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Another day, another disaster averted, Jonas replied, his grin wide and irreverent. And so they soldiered on, fighting the good fight with duct tape, optimism, and a fair measure of gallows humor. Expanse 4 might be falling apart, but as long as there was breath in their lungs, Idris, Lynn, Jonas, and every other stalwart soul aboard would keep it together. Because that's what humans did. Against all odds, they endured and sometimes even thrived. Idris Valter stood at the helm of chaos, like a captain guiding a ship straight into a storm. The flickering lights, now a semi-permanent feature, illuminated the anxiety etched into the faces of the alien diplomats. Viarathox's reptilian eyes glinted in the half-light, predatory and unblinking, as if waiting for the perfect moment to snap up a human snack. The Varak leader's antennae twitched intermittently, maintaining their usual rhythm of judgmental taps. Human, explain the purpose of this soccer demonstration. We still see no clarity. Soccer, Idris began, his voice trying to capture the thrill of a game he'd never personally found thrilling. A sport of unity, cooperation, and the occasional dramatic flop. Think of it as a dance, but with more opportunities to accidentally trip someone. Calther's translator buzzed to life, its droning tone as condescending as ever. Your primitive games will provide distraction, not enlightenment. Hey, nothing wrong with a little distraction, Idris countered, attempting to smile through his discomfort. Besides, it's either a soccer game or a rousing round of who panics first, and I don't think any of us want to see that. The murmurs among the aliens suggested they were, at the very least, intrigued by the madness of human sport. Idris clung to this fragile thread of interest, knowing it was the only thing keeping them from descending into interstellar fisticuffs. In the control room, Lynn was still wrestling with the station's outdated tech, her frustration mounting like a slow-burn fuse. If this clunker could just hold together long enough to get us through this, I swear I'll give it a fresh coat of oil myself, she muttered. Jonas, leaning against a console, tried his best to infuse humor into the cramped room. If we survive, I'm taking it to dinner. Steak dinner. Real fancy, save the flirtation for when we're not trying to avoid spontaneous combustion, Lynn shot back, her hands deftly rerouting power through the terraforming systems, ancient, creaky, but hopefully functional. Terraforming, huh? Always thought it'd be useful for, terraforming. But this works too, Jonas said, watching the screens flicker in a weak resurrection. Think it'll hold, like a cheap spacesuit in a vacuum, Lynn replied, all grim determination. But we're past the point of luxury options. As Lynn worked, the station emitted a new symphony of groans, a sound that could almost be interpreted as reluctant acquiescence. She adjusted one final wire, and the lights flickered back to life with a steadiness that was almost dignified. Almost. All right, patching it through, Lynn announced, her voice carrying a note of triumph. Let's hope Idris can sell this space circus. Meanwhile, back in the conference room, Idris was facing down the alien delegation with the bravado of someone who'd just managed to talk his way out of a speeding ticket. I present to you, Idris said with a flourish, the intergalactic soccer classic, Expanse 4 edition. Let's kick some interspecies camaraderie into gear. The Varak leader's antennae seemed to pause in their eternal dance. This is not a battle, no, thank heavens, Idris replied, more like a ballet with balls. Focus on teamwork, skill, and not stepping on anyone's toes, literally. Viarathox's gaze shifted, a subtle shift that Idris optimistically interpreted as a hint of approval. We shall observe, the reptilian ambassador declared, his voice a deliberate purr. Fantastic, Idris said, the relief almost palpable. Just bear in mind, no biting, maiming, or otherwise eliminating the competition. As the delegates rearranged themselves, forming an awkward circle in the makeshift stadium, Idris took a moment to breathe. This was their chance, a bizarre, desperate chance, to prove humanity's worth through the magic of organized chaos. The game began with an elegant lack of coordination that was as much a spectacle as any space battle. Idris took the opportunity to sidle up to Calther, whose massive form seemed to absorb the room's dim light. Enjoying the show, Idris asked, his grin a little too tight. Your attempts at bonding amuse us, Calther's translator replied with its usual sneer. However, we remain unconvinced. Hey, I didn't say we'd change the galaxy. Just maybe entertain it for a bit, Idris quipped, watching as a particularly ambitious Varak player attempted a bicycle kick and ended up in a tangle of limbs. As the game unfolded in all its chaotic splendor, Lin finally managed to reroute enough power to stabilize the station. Well, stabilize being a relative term. The flickering lights subsided, leaving a glow that was weak but blessedly consistent. Idris could almost feel the station breathe a sigh of relief, though it might have been wishful thinking. The delegates, still unsteady on this strange ground, were nevertheless caught up in the game's unpredictable flow. There was shouting, tripping, and more than a few moments of pure, unbridled confusion. Idris watched as the tension that had suffocated the room began to lift, replaced by cautious curiosity and, dare he think it, enjoyment. "See, we humans have our moments," Idris said to VR Ithok, who was observing with an inscrutable expression. "Your methods are unconventional," VR Ithok replied, his tone less hostile than before. "Comes with the territory," Idris said, shrugging. "We might not always get it right, but we give it a damn good try." As the game continued, the energy in the room shifted, ever so slightly. The Varak leader's antennae drooped in what Idris optimistically interpreted as relaxation, and even Calther's looming presence seemed to soften, its translator mercifully silent. Lin, watching the screens in the control room, couldn't help but smirk at the absurdity of it all. "Only humans would think kicking a ball around could save diplomacy," she remarked. "Hey, it's working," Jonas pointed out, his eyes glued to the unfolding spectacle. "We might just avoid becoming space dust after all. Let's not get cocky," Lin cautioned, though a hint of pride tugged at her lips. "But yeah, maybe we've got a shot." Back in the conference room, the game rolled on, a precarious balance of diplomacy and chaos. Idris watched as the human players, all volunteers from the crew, maneuvered with a mix of surprising skill and inevitable clumsiness. The alien delegates, after initial hesitation, began to join in, VR Ithok's lithe grace and the Varak leader's surprising speed adding a new dimension to the game. Idris, buoyed by the unlikely success, moved among the delegates with renewed confidence. "See, a little fun never hurt anyone. Fun is not a concept we often indulge," VR Ithok admitted, though there was a flicker of something like amusement in his eyes. "Maybe it's time to start," Idris suggested, watching as a human player gave an enthusiastic thumbs up after narrowly avoiding a tackle. In that precarious balance between disaster and salvation, the game became a dance of camaraderie. The laughter was genuine, the tension slowly unwinding like a forgotten spring. Idris allowed himself a moment of hope, a dangerous commodity, but one he cherished nonetheless. As the game reached its chaotic conclusion, with more than a few players sprawled across the floor in exhausted heaps, Idris stepped forward. "And there you have it, esteemed delegates, the beautiful game." The Varak leader's antennae twitched, but there was a softness to his voice that hadn't been there before. "Perhaps there is merit in this. Human creativity." "Glad you think so," Idris replied, his relief a palpable thing. "We might not have all the answers, but we'll keep trying until we find them." VR Ithok gave a slow nod, his earlier skepticism tempered by what Idris hoped was a glimmer of understanding. "There is strength in your persistence. Gotta be good at something," Idris said with a wry grin. "Why not persistence?" As the delegates began to disperse, the atmosphere shifted from one of impending doom to cautious optimism. Idris watched them go, the weight on his shoulders lessened if only by a fraction. Back in the control room, Lin and Jonas exchanged a look of shared accomplishment. The station, for all its protests and quirks, had held together long enough to make their desperate plan work. "We did it," Lin said, her voice steady with the satisfaction of a hard-won victory. "Another day, another intergalactic incident averted," Jonas replied, his humor undiminished. Their small victory, though fragile, was a testament to human ingenuity and stubbornness in the face of overwhelming odds. Expanse 4 might be a rusty bucket of bolts, but it was their rusty bucket of bolts, and against all logic, they'd managed to keep it together once more. Idris rejoined them in the control room, his expression a mix of exhaustion and relief. "Well, that was something good," Lynn asked, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "Something. Not disastrous," Idris replied. "And in this line of work, I'll take it." With the power restored and the delegates placated, Expanse 4 returned to its usual rhythm, a patchwork of creaks and groans that somehow held steady in the vast expanse of space. They'd managed to stave off chaos for another day, proving once again that humans, for all their flaws, were nothing if not persistent. And so they soldiered on, embracing the absurdity of their situation with humor and tenacity. In a universe that often seemed bent on their destruction, they'd found a way to endure, and perhaps, in their own chaotic way, even thrive. As the chaos of the intergalactic soccer classic reached its zenith, Idris Valter found himself in the middle of what could only be described as an interstellar disaster narrowly avoided. The game, if you could call it that, had devolved into a fusion of ballet, wrestling, and, somehow, interpretive dance. But hey, at least they were trying. Idris watched as one of the Varak players attempted a sliding tackle, missing the ball and instead taking out 3 players like an overenthusiastic bowling ball. The Varak leader's antennae twitched in what Idris optimistically interpreted as amusement. This, Idris thought, is diplomacy at its finest. Who knew chaos could be so unifying? Idris muttered, sidling up next to Vrithok. "Your species has a unique approach to conflict resolution," Vrithok said, his reptilian eyes tracking the frenzied players with the intensity of a predator sizing up potential meals. "Equal parts madness and, what's the word? Ah, yes. Madness? We call it charm," Idris replied, grinning. "Or maybe we're just too stubborn to know when to quit." Meanwhile, back in the control room, Lynn Torv was wrestling with the station's outdated systems like a reluctant octopus. Wires dangled around her, threatening to strangle anyone who dared get too close. "If this station were any more temperamental, I'd send it to therapy," she muttered, fingers dancing over the controls. Jonas, leaning against the wall with the kind of casual ease that suggested he might have been born there, smirked. "Hey, if nothing else, it's got character. Like that one uncle everyone avoids at family gatherings. Let's just hope it holds together long enough to avoid turning us into space dust." Lynn shot back, biting her lip in concentration. A few more tweaks and the power levels finally stabilized. Well, as stable as they ever got on Expanse 4. There we go. "We're back in business. Music to my ears," Jonas said, glancing at the screens as the lights flickered back to a steady glow. "I'll tell the rest of the crew to hold off on riding their wills." Back in the makeshift stadium, the game was wrapping up with an elegance that was more accidental than intentional. Idris could see the delegates' expressions shifting from skepticism to something approaching admiration, or maybe resignation. It was hard to tell with all the antennae and scales. The human players, drenched in sweat and glory, or at least one of the two, had somehow managed to steer the game into a close finish. Idris took a deep breath, stepping forward as the final whistle blew in the form of a Varak's triumphant trumpet-like call. "Ladies, gentlemen, and esteemed others," Idris announced, raising his voice over the din. "I give you peace human style. A combination of chaos, determination, and a touch of insanity." The Varak leader inclined his head. "Your methods are unconventional, but effective," Idris countered, seizing the moment with all the grace of a half-drowned cat. "We might not always make sense, but we make it work." Vrithok's gaze lingered on Idris, his expression inscrutable. "There is merit in your persistence, Ambassador Valter. Perhaps we underestimated your kind." "Story of my life," Idris replied with a wry smile. "Humans, underestimated since forever." As the delegates began to gather their things, the atmosphere in the room had shifted from one of impending doom to cautious camaraderie. The tension, once thick enough to cut with a rusty space knife, had ebbed away, leaving something that might have been the fragile beginnings of understanding. Lynn and Jonas made their way into the room, their expressions a mix of relief and against all odds accomplishment. "Looks like you pulled it off, Idris," Lynn said, giving him a nod of approval. "Pulled something off," Idris replied, eyeing the exhausted players sprawled across the floor. "Not sure what exactly, but it's something. Close enough," Jonas chimed in. In space, close enough is practically a win. With the main conflict resolved for the moment, Idris took a moment to survey the room, now filled with the low buzz of conversation rather than the oppressive silence of barely averted disaster. The delegates, for their part, seemed content, or at least willing to entertain the idea that maybe, just maybe, humans weren't a complete waste of space. "Hey, if a game can bring us together, maybe it's not such a bad thing after all," Idris said to VR Ithok, who watched the proceedings with what Idris dared to hope was approval. "Perhaps," VR Ithok said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Though I still do not understand the appeal of this soccer," Idris chuckled. "Yeah, well, neither do half the people who play it, but it's about the experience, right? The teamwork, the struggle, the inevitable injuries. Ah, yes. Your human concept of fun," VR Ithok replied, his tone faintly mocking but without malice. "Exactly," Idris said, grinning. "Welcome to the madness." As the delegates dispersed, the room slowly returning to its usual state of organized chaos, Idris felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Against all odds, they'd managed to turn impending disaster into an opportunity, or at least a temporary reprieve. And in a universe that seemed determined to test their limits, that was nothing short of a miracle. Back in the control room, Lynn and Jonas settled back into their usual spots, the ever-present hum of the station a comforting reminder that, for now, they'd managed to keep the universe at bay. "Think they'll remember this?" Jonas asked, glancing at Lynn as she sipped her coffee, which was more fuel than beverage at this point. "Oh, they'll remember," Lynn replied. "Hard to forget, almost becoming cosmic confetti." "Good point," Jonas agreed. "Here's to surviving another day." "To survival," Lynn echoed, raising her mug in mock salute. Meanwhile, Idris leaned back against the wall, watching as the delegates filed out, their expressions a mix of contemplation and unexpected camaraderie. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start, and in a galaxy that often seemed intent on tearing itself apart, a small step was better than no step at all. "Think we'll see them again?" Idris asked, turning to VR Ithok, who lingered near the exit. "Perhaps," VR Ithok replied, his gaze thoughtful. "There is much to learn from your kind." "Well, if you're ever in the neighborhood, feel free to drop by," Idris said, offering his hand in a gesture that was as much habit as genuine offer. VR Ithok regarded the hand for a moment before reaching out, his grip firm and surprisingly warm. "I shall consider it." As VR Ithok departed, Idris allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. They'd managed to bridge a gap, however briefly, through the sheer absurdity of human ingenuity. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was one they could work with. Lynn joined him by the doorway, her expression a mix of relief and something approaching pride. "You did good, Idris." "Don't sound so surprised," Idris replied, though there was no heat to his words. "We humans have our moments." "Oh, I'm not surprised," Lynn said, smirking. "I'm just impressed you didn't get us all killed." "High praise," Idris replied, chuckling. "I'll take it." As the station settled back into its usual rhythm, a delicate balance of impending catastrophe and unexpected triumph, Idris turned to his colleagues, the weight of the day slowly lifting. They'd survived against all odds and maybe even grown a little in the process. "Here's to the next disaster," Jonas said, raising an imaginary glass in sardonic salute. "To the next disaster," Idris agreed, knowing full well that in the grand scheme of things, they'd only managed to buy a little more time. But for now, that was enough. In a universe fraught with danger and uncertainty, sometimes the best you could hope for was to live to fight another day. And in Idris's book, that was a victory worth celebrating. As the remnants of the game were cleared away, the station's lights flickering ever so slightly in a reminder of its perpetual state of disrepair, Idris took one last look around the room. They'd managed to forge a connection, however tenuous, and that in itself was a triumph. "We'll see what happens next," Lynn said, her voice steady with a quiet confidence. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together," Idris replied, knowing that in the end that was all they had, their wits, their humor, and each other. And really, what more could they ask for? With that, Idris turned away from the fading remnants of chaos, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. They'd survived, and in a universe that often seemed bent on proving otherwise, that was no small feat. "Let's get back to work," Idris said, the familiar grind of the station welcoming them home. And so they did, carrying on in their own irreverent, stubborn way, finding solace in the knowledge that together they could face whatever challenges came their way. After all, in space, there was always another crisis waiting just around the corner. But for now, they had each other, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep the darkness at bay. The Expanse 4 space station creaked ominously, a reminder that in the grand scheme of things, everything was held together by little more than hope, duct tape, and Lynn's sheer stubbornness. Idris stood in the middle of the makeshift conference room, which now resembled a war zone more than a diplomatic assembly. Chairs were appended, and alien fluids of various questionable colors stained the floor. But the tension, that oppressive weight of looming catastrophe, had lifted like a bad smell finally chased away by a stronger stink. "Congratulations, humans," V'Arathok rasped, his reptilian voice a soothing hiss compared to the earlier cacophony. "You turned chaos into—" "Not worse chaos, thanks," Idris replied dryly. "We aim to please." The other delegates, antennae twitching with what Idris hoped was curiosity rather than irritation, began to circulate through the room, exchanging pleasantries that were just a hair's breadth from outright insults. It was diplomacy at its finest, like a family Christmas where everyone was sober for once. "Think they'll want a rematch?" Jonas asked, slouching into the room with the casual air of someone who'd spent too many hours watching the whole breach alarms flash like some twisted disco party. "Let's hope not," Idris murmured, eyeing the Varek leader, who was engaged in an intense conversation with a Venar delegate. Their conversation seemed to involve a lot of eye color changes and twitchy antennae movements that Idris could only interpret as "we don't hate you, but we're reserving judgment." Lynn joined them, wiping grease from her hands with a rag that looked like it had been through 5 separate wars. "Well, the life support systems are as stable as my last relationship, which is to say, not very. But hey, they're working. Good enough for government work," Idris remarked, watching the delegates begin to file out, their expressions a mix of skepticism and reluctant acceptance of humanity's quirks. "Are you implying we're not professionals?" Lynn smirked, raising an eyebrow. "Not at all," Jonas interjected, clapping Idris on the back. "We're just professionals in dealing with disasters." "Speaking of disasters," Lynn said, "I hear there's talk of resuming terraforming projects with a bit more enthusiasm." Idris, relieved to have a half-decent segue, nodded. "Yeah, V'Arathok mentioned something about collaborating on a new planet. Maybe one of those barren rocks we keep tripping over in the Expanse. You know, the ones only a mother could love. You mean the ones we use for target practice?" Jonas quipped, earning a chuckle from Lynn. "Those are the ones," Idris confirmed. "Turns out they want to see if we can mess up a planet any more than it already is. We humans have quite the reputation to uphold. Terraforming," Lynn mused, "because space wasn't made for us, so we're making it ours." "Exactly," Idris said, gesturing dramatically. "And if we can terraform peace out of a soccer match, we can terraform a planet. Or at least try to." "Try" being the operative word, Jonas added, leaning in conspiratorially. "And if it doesn't work, we can always blame it on faulty alien technology." The delegates were now dispersing, leaving behind a room that bore witness to what Idris could only describe as a diplomatic miracle. A miracle wrapped in chaos, but a miracle nonetheless. "Think they actually respect us now?" Lynn asked, a skeptical lilt in her voice. "Well, it's hard to say," Idris replied, glancing at VR Ithok, who was lingering near the exit. "But if not respect, then at least they're not actively plotting our demise." "Progress, right. That's one way to look at it," Lin said. "What's the other?" "The other is that they're just biding their time until we screw up again," Idris admitted. "Which, let's be honest, is only a matter of time. Here's to inevitable failure," Jonas said, raising his imaginary glass again. "To failure," Lin echoed, joining in the mock toast. As the last of the delegates filed out, Idris turned back to VR Ithok, who was waiting with a patience that Idris envied. "So, VR Ithok," he said, adopting his best ambassadorial tone, "what do you think? Can we count on your support for this terraforming venture?" VR Ithok's scales glimmered under the station's harsh lighting, a reptilian smirk, if such a thing were possible, appearing on his face. "Your methods are unorthodox." "Unorthodox is our middle name," Jonas interjected with a grin. "Yes, I gathered as much," VR Ithok replied, "but your tenacity is commendable. Perhaps there is merit in this project." "We shall consider it." "Consideration is a start," Idris said, extending his hand once more. VR Ithok hesitated for a moment before shaking it, his grip firm. "We will be in touch, Ambassador Walter." With that, VR Ithok made his exit, leaving Idris with a sense of accomplishment tinged with the usual undercurrent of impending disaster. He watched the reptilian delegate disappear down the corridor, his thoughts already turning to the logistics of what lay ahead. "Think we'll get along with the Zokkin?" Lin asked, breaking into his reverie. "Well, as long as they don't mind our unique brand of chaos, I think we'll manage," Idris replied. "Besides, it's not like we're trying to terraform their homeworld." Yet, Jonas repeated, a mischievous glint in his eye. "You never know what'll happen in this universe." "True enough," Idris agreed. "But for now, we've got a project to put together, and it's going to take all the human ingenuity we can muster, and probably a whole lot of luck," Lin added. "Luck, duct tape, and sheer determination," Jonas said, ticking them off on his fingers. "The holy trinity of engineering." Idris chuckled, feeling the tension of the past few hours finally start to dissipate. "All right, team. Let's get to work. We've got a planet to not screw up." With the resolution of the peace conference behind them and the tentative acceptance of their offer on the table, the galaxy seemed just a little less hostile, a little more cooperative. Idris knew that it wouldn't last forever, but for now, it was enough. As they made their way back to the control room, the station's familiar groans welcoming them like an old friend, Idris felt a rare sense of optimism. It wasn't much, but it was something. And in the cold, vast reaches of space, something could make all the difference. Once inside the control room, Lin took her usual seat, surrounded by the comforting chaos of outdated tech that defied logic but somehow managed not to explode in their faces. "All systems are go," she announced, mimicking an ancient phrase she barely understood herself. "Which means what exactly?" Jonas asked, eyeing the blinking lights with suspicion. "Which means they haven't completely failed yet," Lin clarified with a grin. "Give it time we have," Idris said, settling into his chair with a contented sigh. "For now. So what's next?" Lin asked, turning to Idris. "What do we focus on while we wait for the universe to inevitably throw another crisis our way?" "Well, we've got a terraforming project to plan, a station to keep from imploding, and a reputation as galactic peacemakers to maintain," Idris listed, counting off each item on his fingers. "Busy schedule," Jonas remarked. "And here I thought space was supposed to be quiet." "Quiet's the last thing we want," Lin pointed out. "Quiet means we're not doing our jobs," Touché, Jonas conceded. "Right," Idris said, leaning forward with renewed purpose. "Let's see if we can't shake things up a bit more before the cosmic powers that be decide to test us again." As they set to work, the hum of the station providing a familiar soundtrack to their efforts, Idris couldn't help but feel a small measure of satisfaction. They'd faced down chaos and come out the other side, bruised, battered, but unbroken. And as long as they had each other, they'd keep facing whatever the universe threw their way. After all, in the grand cosmic scheme, they were just getting started.